Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here at this session on this workshop on migration and the search for home. This group work stems out of an idea which I have tried to develop with many colleagues over the last few years, namely that if we foreground home as a place, as an emotional relationship with it, and as an idea, a category in migration studies, we can make better sense of our research in a number of domains and fields. This was basically the idea which I tried to develop in a short book on this topic, which addresses the interface between home and migration at a methodological level, as well as in a time-space perspective, showing how the idea of home can be appreciated and enacted not only as a domestic, private space, but also as a public issue, as a political question which sheds light on the interaction between migrants and counterparts in the countries of origin and of settlement. Based on this idea, I'm very grateful to IMISCOE, which enabled me to organize this workshop, which is also sort of a follow-up of an ERC project on the same topic which I'm leading over the next few years. And I'm very grateful to a number of colleagues who accepted to join it and give their own comments and view on how the interface of migration and home matters to their own expertise, research fields, and so forth. This is intended as an interdisciplinary workshop. We will have short and focused presentations from sociologists and anthropologists, geographers from a number of national backgrounds. So my proposal is to have, in the next hour or so, 6 focused comments on these topics, 10 minutes long each, after which we can open the floor for debate to follow, for the conversation to be carried on. So the order will be more or less the same as in the program of this session, the only difference being that Yvonne Riano will not be able to be here, she apologizes for this, and that the first presentation will be given by Marta, Bivand, and or by Marta, sorry, I was wishing it. So, okay, Marta is here, so we can start with Marco, please, sorry, because I can. So if you don't mind standing here for a 10 minutes, and then we will follow one by one. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Paolo. This is a fascinating work, fascinating project, and I'm not going to comment on the book, but maybe I'm going to say a few words about what is not in the book and in the project, because as far as I know, the book deals with migrants, so people who have moved, and I think that there are reasons also to raise issues about homemaking, home building, homing, as you say, for following generations. Because I think it would be wrong to assume that there's no issue for second generation. They are born in the country in which their parents arrived, and therefore the issue of home is not an issue for them. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, things are not that clear, and I think that many people in the second and even third, maybe even fourth generation are confronted with the issue of home. What is home? What type of home can we, homelings can we build or rebuild? And actually, even though I don't like to talk about myself, but I went through that experience. I'm myself a second generation, and for a very, very long time, I struggled with that question. What is really, where is home for me? Is it where I am, where my parents took me, or is it connected to the place where my parents come from, At the time, there was not an issue about the kind of digital home, you know, that developed recently with internet and so on. And I think still today, when I do a lot of work with second generation and third generation kids in Belgium, the issue is present, and I think there are at least 4 dimensions. The first dimension is about something which is probably the least problematic, is a very strong connection with where people live. I remember a few years ago the French political scientist Catherine Victor de Venden was talking about le nationalisme de la cage d'escalier, you know, stairs nationalism, to reflect this idea that, you know, there was total control of the territory, a total sense of belonging, a total sense of home in, you know, the banlieue in France, where people are, physically where they are. And we see that there is something like that, you know, the street beside the building, the street, the neighborhood. It's where people feel at home, these second generation people, more than belonging or considering the nation as home, or even the region. It's really the locality as they define it. The second is, and this is also close to Paolo's interest, is all the interconnections between here and somewhere else, that sometimes raises kind of attempts to construct a kind of global understanding of home. You know, we are all on the same boat. There are all these discussions about, you know, the kind of alliance of the global disadvantaged people across the planet with all sorts of connection, which is important also to understand how second and third generation define, reconstruct what home can be. Then there is the issue of where parents are from, which is a very traditional, of course, topic for people who are interested in the second generation. And I'm still amazed today how often the people I talk to, I make interview with, say when they go, for example, they go to Morocco or to Turkey for the holidays, places in which they have never lived at all. We're going home for the summer. And probably when they are home, they are confronted to the fact that they are not considered to be home by the people who are there. So this is the third dimension which is interesting to examine. And then there is this kind of field of research which is now is already explored, is about the new technologies and how it has an impact on understanding of home and homing practices. Maybe here there's something specific to young people from the second generation, and as you know, second generation are not only young, I'm not young, but I'm part of the second generation. And this is something that would be interesting to explore specifically for these generations. So that's what I wanted to say, and I wanted also to say, where is he? We have a PhD student in our center, Shannon Demery, who is studying homing practices for first generation children, so to say, which is another dimension that you do not cover extensively maybe in the book, but maybe you can jump in the discussion later on. Voilà. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Paolo, for the invitation. It's really great to be here. Okay, so I'm a geographer. Maybe it's the only, or maybe there's one more geographer in the comments, and there are others in the room. That's really great. The first thing I wanted to say is really that I'm enjoying this book. That is not written by someone who is officially a geographer, that the spatial components are really dealt with very, very adequately and taken really, really seriously. And I really appreciate that in interdisciplinary work, that is actually done. And also that you engage with spatial theorizations, both from the perspectives of geographers, but also others who work with those kinds of spatial theories. So that's kind of not really on the home part, but on the sort of interdisciplinary conversation, and actually that this is a field where contributions to interdisciplinary theorization are possible, and I think that you're really onto something. So that's really very useful. I think in particular the ways in which you sort of think of the spatial as both territory and scale, place and network, which is a very usual theorization in geography. I don't think you use those four categories in that way, but that sort of comes out of the book, so I really saw that as really great. So that was a very sort of constructive part of it, and I'm going to try to be a little bit more critical as well. So I have three comments to make, and all of them basically come back to this question that I had while I was reading the book. And it's something that you grapple with yourself. And it relates to the relationship between belonging, place attachments, identifications, and this sort of term of feeling at home. So sense of belonging, feeling at home, these kinds of things, which of course run across most of the book anyway, and in this nexus of home and migration are really, really central. So basically, I'll quote from the book here, you say on page 11 that feeling at home maybe should be seen as a distinctive emotional experience rather than an ancillary notion to those other terms, so belonging, place attachment, identifications. Yet when reading through the book, I know this is a little bit cheeky because it's really hard to distinguish them. But I think you sort of fall into you say sort of the trap that you're setting up for yourself in a way. In that actually later on in the book, you don't really distinguish between them. So I think maybe this is sort of a challenge for you in the project that you have now. You know, how can we actually, or is it possible, more carefully? Because in fact, in a lot of literature on belonging, the way in which belonging is defined and explained is very much, as having a sense of belonging is feeling at home. I think maybe there's something that you can pick up from the geography literature again, where there's this very famous book by Tim Prestel on being in place, out of place, which connects back to the rows of spatial dimensions that you have in this feeling of being at home as being in place somewhere. So that's kind of the gist of the sort of question that I had running throughout the book. And then I have three comments that are more specific that sort of in some different ways relate to that. The first one is on the notion of multiplicity of homes, which you write a lot about. And you sort of focus on here and then there, and that it's not exclusive, and it doesn't have to be spatially anchored only in one place. Specifically in relation to transnational ties, of course, and migrants' houses in countries of emigration. And I'll come back to that in the final point. So what I want to flag up here really is this sort of discussion that we had actually in the last session as well, but more broadly on the interactions of migrant transnationalism and integration, and how we can sort of think about integration and transnationalism as things that interact. And I think that's very much in the sort of spirit of what you're doing. And I think that there is maybe more to do in terms of theorizing and understanding home in this specific context. So first of all, I think much of the empirical research, both here and in North America, has by now shown that it doesn't work to think of transnationalism and integration in a zero-sum kind of way. We know by now that they operate in different kinds of ways. They might be more or less conflicting, but it's not a kind of either-or. That is kind of pretty much established by now. But much else is not established. And I think what I would suggest is particularly fruitful ways of approaching it is to think of these questions in relation to the question of membership. And if we think of membership as processes of becoming and being and remaining members who feel a sense of belonging, who feel at home, if you like, then that could be a way of approaching how that goes on here and there. And I think two keywords which are already flagged up in a lot of the transnational literature and are useful here are those of simultaneity and of friction. And I think one of the challenges is often that we sort of, maybe it's a human instinct, we sort of assume that friction needs to be removed. Well, of course the human condition is full of friction, and for migrants perhaps especially so. But I don't think actually it's exclusive to migrants. I think the human condition is full of friction anyway, and trying to sort of find ways of resolving that is not really going to work. But maybe trying to understand how it works, what it means. The second question or comment I really have, which is perhaps a little bit more provocative, connects really back to this issue of membership. And you had, I think it's in the fifth one, the last chapter at least, you come back to sort of the political side. And I really enjoy that you also have that. So I'm working currently both on the question of citizenship and of national identity in nations. And I'll leave the citizenship side for now, but I want to say something more provocative about national membership. I think you're onto something, because you say something about how we can think of home in more progressive kind of ways. And I think that's really important also in the political context that we have in Europe today. Because if we think of the nation as home in some kind of metaphorical way, and a lot of people do that, probably many of us in this room at some level also do that. When we think, where are you going? I'm going home. What are you referring to? Is it your house? Is it your city? Your neighborhood? Is it the country you live in? In the same way we have the nationality, and in the passport, of course, that is the nationality of your citizenship. Is that home? Is it not? I mean, these are complicated questions. But at some level, we do have this sort of collective idea of home as the nation as well. And I think it's really dangerous if we try to problematize that from the outside. It can be maybe a neutral statement, it could be something which is negative, or it could be something which is positive. The reason why we see it as negative very often, especially from the point of view of discrimination, and often in migration studies, is that there is this exclusivist, often in the European context, white notion of home as nation. But who is defining that? I think there are good reasons to explore this empirically, and I'm doing that in one of the projects that I'm working on now. And this touches very much upon what Marta was already saying. So I have a very brief quote from one of my participants who said, "I'm globally homeless, whether I'm in my parents' country of origin or whether I'm somewhere else. There's always someone else who belongs more." And I think this is, of course, sort of this second generation, or whatever you would call it, type of dilemma, right? So it's not just the migrants don't fit in, it's actually also increasingly the children of migrants who don't fit in either here or there, and maybe have never actually felt at home properly anywhere, because they're always seen as someone who doesn't belong as much as someone else. So that's kind of the challenge that we have there. But at the same time, this same research participant also said, but actually, for me, home is Oslo. This is my home. And I'm able to negotiate that with my peers, with my classmates. And among youth especially, diversity is normalizing. It's problematized, it's politicized. There's a challenge with populism also in Norway. But at the same time, it's an everyday reality in so many schools. And actually, in that classroom, there is a sense of home, where there is a collective which actually works. And who's to say that that is not actually also a national collective? It happens in Norwegian. What people have in common is being born in Norway, speaking to each other in Norwegian. Why do we not think of that as something national? Why is it problematic to label that? And actually, there's some scholars who are trying to think of this more progressively in terms of how you think about a nation. And there's some work, it's really interesting, by Marta and Tiana about the plural nation specifically, which I think is really worth looking into also in terms of connecting to home. Now, the final point I want to make is less provocative and also less theoretically ambitious, I think. And it connects to the migrant houses, or what you call remittances houses. I don't really like that term. But the classic houses that are built in countries of emigration. And first of all, I'm really waiting for your great review article, which you're setting up really greatly, like collecting all the studies that are done, and saying that there's need for a review article. So I hope that I'll be able to read that quite soon. And the second point I want to make there is that I think also there's more to do, because you have these classic houses that you describe, and I guess many of us would know that this, you see them in the landscape in origin areas of emigration. And you can see perhaps even where the families have gone to based on the structure of the house, whether it's completed or not, what type of architecture it has. So my research field, among other ways in Pakistan, there we see very clearly which people have gone to Greece, which to the Gulf, which to maybe other countries in Europe. So this is obviously a classic sort of area of investigation that needs to be done more work on. And my point right here is I think there is more to do. And specifically drawing on the very sort of not very well documented evidence from Pakistan, but things I've noticed while I've been there, is that increasingly now these houses are actually not just not used. Very often they're actually being converted or used as well. Not most of them, but some of them. And it's interesting, because then it's families, relatives, it's the children of the family's servants from back in the day who are now using these houses. And this is part of these intricate reciprocal relations in the community. So these houses are somehow having a new life, maybe, which is very different to the usual stories of these houses that we have. And the final point, which I think is really interesting in the Pakistani context, and I know that it happens some other places as well, is that increasingly when migrants go home, and specifically when they bring their children, they don't necessarily go back to the village anymore, or not always, because there's not enough electricity. The kids, they need the internet. This is not going to work. But they invest in flats, in houses in the capital cities, or in the case of Pakistan, in Lahore and in Karachi. So both in Islamabad and in Lahore, you have these big areas which are, advertised towards overseas Pakistanis. And of course, well-to-do Pakistanis in Pakistan could also invest in housing there. These are very often gated communities. very sort of high end of the housing market, very unfamiliar to other people standard housing, very problematic in a sort of inequality kind of sense. But in this narrow focus on migrants and housing in home, I think it's really interesting because it brings back the sort of, not just the physical structures, but also the materiality in terms of being a financial investment, which actually gives you, you know, a financial surplus coming out of it. And it's more this sort of rational financial investment in that sense, in this housing, in the country of immigration. I think that could be some further avenues for research on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, hello, those of you who know me, I'm Frykman. I am an ethnologist, and I'm having been an ethnologist working on different kind of issues, including war-related experiences and the importance and meanings of place in relation to war experiences and being a refugee, etc. I came to Sweden and became a migration scholar. So I had this general stance that migration, if I may call it like this, is providing me as a researcher with a number of experimental situations that help me think and rethink issues that I knew from other contexts when doing research on people who have not been moving and who have been living at home all their lives. So I recently had a project that actually it's an ongoing topic that I'm very interested in, and that is basically migrants and objects. So, as I said in the short abstract that I sent, I don't know how many people read it, but I really appreciated this book because it really gives a solid overview from different perspectives of what has been done. But I appreciate it very much also for the constant reminder that we do need empirical research on all the aspects that the book is important. I don't know how many people had a chance of reading the book, but it's really giving a solid, I'm sorry, talking on the boat was very exhausting yesterday. It's really giving a state of the art on home research from different perspectives, and from different discipline perspectives also, so I really appreciate it for that. Coming from what I just explained, from this ongoing interest for migrants and objects, and by this I mean objects of everyday use, objects of everyday life, especially objects that are used in the realms of home, the objects that are helping people to feel at home, and in a way what Marta was telling last as her last point is fitting perfectly to what I'm going to say, because you said, oh, I see in Pakistan if people have been in Greece or wherever they have been, because there is something in the materiality, even from the outside, that you notice as brought back from elsewhere, and for different reasons that I'm trying to theorize in my work, being important to people, and they want maybe not to replicate, but to integrate, and definitely to keep in touch also there. Okay? So one of my very important points is that here and there, of course, are not stable categories. It depends on the moment of talking, depends on who is speaking and when. So this spatial and temporal dimension come very importantly. I mean, they must be integrated in order for us to understand what we are talking about. You do have these different perspectives, not only spatial, but I appreciate the temporal perspective. Things change. It depends when we are interviewing or looking at ethnographically people, and of course, definitely which generations we are interviewing. But what is, in a way, I don't know if it's strange. I told Paolo, oh, I was so happy that you're not taking up this because that means that my work is very important. I kind of know that, right? But I feel that house, just as was said before, you are looking at these houses from the outside, and you have this notion of material walls of dwelling, like we should look beyond material walls of dwelling, but then your beyond means political implications, right? It means how homes or homing is accomplished in public spaces, etc., okay? What I'm suggesting, and that is actually missing in the book, is to zoom into the houses, to zoom into the living rooms, to zoom into the kitchens, to zoom into the drawers, to look at the objects of everyday use that are so normal and so much in the everyday use that they are not noticed, that they are part and parcel of people's subjectivity. I have extremely interesting examples of, and I think this is actually a track that is very productive to follow, like what is counterintuitive, what is not taken up in these classical models of what it means to be a migrant that we teach our students in different migration programs and migration courses. And that is, what is it that the migrants bring from elsewhere, from where they migrated? What is it that they can't live without when they go home to the original place, be it their own original place or the place of their parents? You mentioned the internet connection. Yeah, definitely, we all understand that and know that. Did research on it, but it's not only internet. It's a particular sort of coffee, following the coffee and migrants, following the cooking vessels, following the daily devices that people are using. As an ethnologist, I'm not shying away from doing research on what seems to be extremely trivial things, because it's precisely in this triviality that people, in an affective sense, feel at home. Okay? So it's precisely zooming into these daily practices and trivial, ordinary actuality that I propose is missing in the book, and I suppose it can be complementing whatever important perspective you were taking. So I can edit myself. I was publishing just a couple of months ago the most recent issue of Ethnologia Felica. I was publishing an article on conceptualizing continuity, where I think it's theoretical framework up, so if you're interested, you can read the details there. So, two theoretical perspectives are important for me, and this is, I was very inspired many years ago when I first read Peggy Levitt and Nina Gliciola's, by now I believe, very much quoted article on the simultaneity of transnational lives, and their analytical distinction between being and belonging. Okay? And belonging is, if I may just make it short, like it's waving the flag, and being is having that grandmother's cooking pot that you must have, because otherwise this soup is never going to be the same. Yeah, okay? So just to make it very simple and very short. But so obviously, from what I said a minute ago, I'm interested in the cooking pots and not in the pictures on the walls or flags that people wave in public locations and so on. I also have a warning here. I don't think it's very productive to use or to try to lump in the same project. I don't say you're doing this, but public spaces and homing in public spaces and things that I'm talking about right now, they're quite different. I think that they should be kept separate. We are not helped by trying to use the notion of home for everything. I think, yeah, that maybe doing empirical research is preventing us from lumping it all together, because it's hardly possible. I think it's quite different processes that we are talking about. Again, I don't think that you're suggesting that we should lump it all, but your book is in potential having like very different, addressing very different reasons of home and practices. The other theoretical perspective that I found extremely interesting, and I think you are going to mention Hassan Hash, a very inspiring anthropologist, Lebanese Australian, really, really good. His article from a couple of years ago, Eavesdropping on Bourdieu, is very, very inspiring for my work, because he is discussing Bourdieu's notion of habitus, but then going into this materiality of the body and exploring the notion of hexes that is less known. And as again I said, it's kind of explained in my article. I'm not trying to give a lecture on hexes here, but it's helping me to theorize this. What I have as an object is helping me to be what I am, ergo what that I feel good and I feel myself in sync with myself in a place that because of that becomes my home. So it's kind of turning the focus on the very materiality of the objects and what they do for people in order to make them feel at home. So that is something that I feel is if it's absolutely. So I actually searched your book, since I got it on PDF, I could search for keywords and for specific notions, and you do mention objects. You do mention material culture generally, and you do mention objects, but then when you exemplify, you actually mention pictures on the walls. Yeah. So, which of course it's not only legitimate but important, and by saying that my interest is in the being practices and not belonging practices, not show the identity that you want to show to others, or maybe just feel good because you see your native image of your native place, or you have some kind of cultural, historical scene from your original country, etc. I'm not saying that this is not important. I'm just saying that matters of meanings and symbols have been so much more explored in migration studies than this practical, daily kind of hexes explained issues of materiality that makes people feel at home. I will mention two examples. One is actually self-ethnography, and actually a moment in my life, in my migration trajectory, that made me think about these methods. And I actually needed a couple of years between the experience and the possibility of understanding the importance of this experience and using it, as I'm going to do now in a minute, in order to illustrate what I'm talking about. I have been living in Sweden for many years now, almost 18 years. I come from Croatia originally. I haven't been living in other countries before. Came to Sweden with my full wish and consciousness. I'm not a refugee, you know, everything was fine. I'm living a middle-class life, both here and there, so no problem. I have my own home, it's owned and so on in Sweden. Right? For more than a year, if not 2 years, every day, and you must trust me, I'm not inventing a story, it's totally true. Every single day, unlocking the door of my Swedish home, I was doing it in the wrong direction. Okay? Wrong from the Croatian, habituated, not reflected upon, non-negotiable, discursively negotiable point of view. You can't say, come on door, can't we negotiate? No, it's a locked door. It's my home, legally, emotionally. My husband is on the other side of the wall. Okay? No problem. But the door is locked. And I'm reminded, it's a trifle of a second, but I was reminded again and again of my habitus being a foreign habitus. In a wrong person in the wrong place, or right person in the wrong place, we can play with this. Eventually, I don't know if anyone has similar experience, but there is something with this. Okay, yeah. I'm talking to a Romanian colleague, she said, yes, it's wrong in Sweden. Okay, so there is so it's a small thing, which is, I think, perfectly illustrated, because we don't think about. Latour has a wonderful article, short article about the Berlin key, which is a very special key that you really need to know how to unlock. But we are talking about just this very kind of simple keys. And still, it was reminding me of my foreign habits. Okay? I learned it. Guess what? When I was coming back to my Croatian home, I was going the wrong way. And here we come with the temporal perspective. After 4 or 5 years, of course, I'm doing it there. Examples of things that people can't do without when going back. Again, as I said, very interesting. You can read some empirical kind of illustrations in my text if you like. I'm going to finish with something that I think I really want to explore more, and go back to my research participants, or find new research participants, and explore precisely that issue. And that is, it's not only us as migrants or migrants that we're working with, be it of second or third or first generation everyone, who are defining whatever spatial, temporal, affective, etc. aspects of their own life, or possibly reflecting on those aspects when we are asking them to do so. But it's also others who live in those places, who live in those supposed homes or to-be homes and so on, who are defining it for them. And as you said, yeah, there are some others who said that they belong more because you are the second generation, etc. But also, again, if we zoom into this level of drawer in the kitchen, maybe, I take it literally, I mean it literally. What happens then? What do we see then? It's not only that the continuity of transnational lives can be established by having things or replicating the use of things or imitating certain styles, etc., so that this continuity or simultaneity, spatial regulated economy, is established and people feel good, because in the end of the day it's about the well-being. It's about if I feel in sync with myself in a different place. I had this wonderful part of the interview with a young girl who was actually living in a neighboring country and studying in a neighboring country, but not going home very often because she didn't have money to do so. And so she comes back after maybe not being, visiting twice a year. She comes back in the middle of her study period. She comes back and sees that her mother and her sister are using her mug. Okay? This young woman, she can't get over it. She says, yeah, I understand, but I can't get over it. She's so hurt by the fact that her mug is not seen as her mug anymore, because they said, yeah, you're not here anymore. Of course we're using it. It's a mug from being defined or redefined as something that is not specific to her, that is not hers anymore. So this is not, of course, this is not about legal ownership or emotional. I mean, she has no issue with her mother or her sister, but it's again something with the materiality that is there, and that is also one final, underexplored issue, which is this affective quality of an object. That is something I was also exploring in the recent project of affect and material culture, which I also think is something that is like a blind spot. That in your project you might find the innate projects, which we are envious for, could perhaps explore. I would be only hilarious if someone really did some empirical stuff. Okay, but this I finished. Thank you.
Who's going to be the next Alistair? Could you come here?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alistair from the University of Edinburgh. I'd like to congratulate Paolo first on his excellent book and for showing us how migration disrupts the common sense, self-evident, emotionally warm idea of home as singular and personal place. The discussion of how migration brings politics into play in home settings is, I think, really great, and brings to life how much home is not just a secluded private domestic affair, but actually a great relevance to public affairs. And our first line of commentary pertains to this last point. And in no way is this a criticism of the book, it's maybe more just to extend or complement some of the arguments that you already made. So I appreciate very much your categorization of two types of homing. First of all, as attempts towards place appropriation, claim to belong in equal terms. And secondly, a claim to exert control over public space, to make it more like how home should be, i.e. according to one's social or cultural background and upbringing, like home in countries of origin. And actually, it's not just migrants who do this type of homing, everybody does this. The first type of homing, claims to belong, I feel has been very productively theorized by Haj, as Maja also referred to. And Haj differentiates three types of what he calls national belonging. The first of all is the homely belonging, and this is the most common discourse, characterized by feelings of safety, familiarity, and satisfaction of life needs. And this is something that obviously you talk about in the book as well. Second type of belonging is a functional belonging, and this draws on a language of service to the nation. I belong here because I contribute. And this is often a discourse which migrants invoke when they make claims to belonging. And thirdly, a governmental type of belonging. This is a more managerial discourse by which the subject can legitimately express how the nation should be constituted. And so this is kind of pointing towards your notion, Paolo, of homing as exerting control over states, how the nation should be constituted. So this is just, first of all, to, I guess, flag up what I feel is Hash's really great contribution, how it kind of links with your own work. My second line of commentary is a call to think about the constitutive elements of home, which you present so well in the chapters regarding significant social relationships, place, time, and politics. And to think about these in perhaps new ways, but recognize that home is not just an emotionally imbued construct, but is also of value instrumental. And you hinted at this, Paolo, already in highlighting the importance of feeling secure in your home. And obviously security, that's surely an instrumental function of value. It's not just an emotional value. To feel safe and secure, that's really a kind of a sine qua non of human existence. But security also takes other forms, as satisfaction of basic life needs, including security, but also other things. So this could be social protection, social safety net, welfare mechanisms, and so on. And often migrants have to rely on these forms of social protection to some extent. So being able to prove access to these social goods is crucial. And the way that one does that in modern welfare states is to show that you have a claim based on a territorial residence or domicile. And this notion of domicile obviously is etymological, has connections to home, Latin, domus, and so on. So I'm kind of flagging up this idea of domicile in some of my recent work. And it's a theme I have to develop in my forthcoming book. So this is a bit of a shameless plug for that, which is coming out at the end of the year in the IMISCOE series. So in a nutshell, the book is asking why older labour migrants living in France, who did not reunify with their families in France, but instead their families were left behind, as it were, and they spent their working lives in France. Why they don't choose to return home at the time. And this is kind of counterintuitive from migration theories, which expect these men to return, both because their pensions are worth more money in Morocco or Senegal than they are in Paris, and also because of the centrality, I guess the primacy which we put towards family ties and these kind of emotional connections in our discussions at home and so on. So in my research for the book, I was struck by the fact that my respondents felt compelled to justify their presence in France while they had not returned. And often they did this through saying, well, I have to be here because I get my healthcare here, I get other welfare benefits here and so on. I have a great relationship with my doctor, medication which I rely on, I can't get in my home village and so on. So kind of this embeddedness in these welfare institutions was really crucial there. And so this gave me a cause for reflection. Could inclusion in these organizations, these welfare mechanisms, also constitute the type of home for these men, valued for these instrumental reasons rather than more emotional reasons? So I was thinking about this question a lot, and I eventually was directed towards Nicholas Women's theory of social systems, and this I found was very helpful as well. So what it means to be included and to feel at home does not necessarily only imply an emotional attachment to a territory, place, or to a social group, the household, the ethnic group, or the nation. And this is the kind of conventional way in which home has been conceptualized, either as place or its connection to a social group, or often both kind of together. Luhmann's theory of social systems challenges the assumption that society is formed primarily of groups of individuals distributed across distinct, demarcated territories. And this has been the dominant conception of society across history, encompassing ethnic groups, tribes, and in the modern era nation states. So instead, Luhmann proposes an alternative model of society based on individuals' acts of communication in distinct social realms differentiated by their functions, such as politics, law, economy, religion, and so on. So in pre-modern societies, social inclusion and life chances were determined by one's social rank and one's status. But in social systems, which make up this functionally differentiated society, social inclusion operates according to codes and logics of each specific system which you require to access. And these criteria are fundamentally more inclusive than in pre-modern times. Discrimination on the basis of inherited, prescribed characteristics such as ethnicity or class is no longer relevant or should no longer be relevant. Nonetheless, in practice, it is organizations in society, such as hospitals, schools, businesses, legal courts, and so on, which regulate access and inclusion in social systems, and individuals may actually be exposed to considerable risks of exclusion. And this is where the welfare state comes in. The role of the political system via the welfare state is to counter the risk of being excluded and to intervene in education, health, labour markets, etc. So I guess in my research in France, I was finding with my older male respondents living in these migrant hostels that they found it imperative to observe periods of residence in France in order to access different welfare state mechanisms. And if they wanted to prove that they were domiciled in France to get access to these services. And this idea of domicile has not really been very well explored in the social sciences or in migration studies more specifically, or in home studies. But I think it can be a very productive notion. Just to sum up, home can be, I'm not saying that home isn't about territory and home isn't about connections to important social groups and to effective ties with loved ones. But what I want to argue is that to be at home can also mean to be included in different social systems which give, I guess you could say, functional or instrumental worth. They essentially guarantee a certain level of subsistence and living, and guarantee that security and I guess you could say, well-being is guaranteed. And this is not to deny the importance of place belonging or group belonging as constituted of home. Instead, it is to recognize the growing complexity of society and social relations. If Luhmann's claim that society has become more complex and differentiated is accepted, it becomes interesting to explore the implications of his theory for our thinking about home. So, thank you.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Dirk Geldof, and I've been reading Paolo's book as a sociologist. A sociologist working in Belgium, doing research in Brussels, a city where 72% of all inhabitants have roots in migration. Living in Antwerp and doing research in Antwerp, a city comparable to Rotterdam, where 48% of the citizens have roots in migration. And just as Paolo, I'm working in two domains. I'm teaching social work students and family science students on migration using my book on super diversity in the heart of Europe. And part-time I'm teaching in the Faculty of Design Sciences in Antwerp, students in architecture and interior architecture, where I try to introduce them into sociology and urban sociology. The first group of social work students, they know that society is becoming more and more
diverse, that's super diverse, that most of the people they're working with have migration backgrounds, etc. Then I step in the University of Antwerp in the architectural department, and I enter a complete white surrounding with only white colleagues, mostly white students, with strong middle class bias, and they say, diversity, migration. We're just designing homes and houses for the people, the white people. Even in cities where 50 or 70% of the inhabitants have a migration background. So Paolo, I'm very happy you published this book, because it's now on the reading list for my students in architecture, to introduce them, to make them aware, to put concepts of super diversity on the agenda, not only to understand the context of the city, but also to implement what is home meaning for the majority minority cities, for the majority of the citizens that constitute our cities today. So thank you very much for that. When you invite me to be critical, I'm not taking the point of view of the architectural sciences, because they will learn a lot of this in that book, and after the next your work in the ERC project. But I will take the point of view from my research on super diversity. Then I have 3 topics I want to raise, or 3 questions for you. First of all, I appreciate a lot in your book, in the first chapters, the choice to explore homing as a process, which is not about measuring what is home and how can we measure it. It's a process, and the way you define it, it's a process through which people negotiate a sense of home vis-à-vis external circumstances. And this implies, and I like that a lot as sociologists, an actor-oriented understanding of how people do these negotiations, how they act, how they perceive, construct, and enact home. I think this resonates quite a lot with theories of superdiversity as well, because superdiversity invites us to understand, to look at processes of diversification, and to think beyond stereotyping, beyond the migrant, beyond the Moroccan, beyond the Muslim, beyond the Dutch, the Belgian, the Flemish, the Walloon, etc. And to look at processes of diversification where differences within groups and communities might become larger and more important than differences between groups and communities. But first, invitation to reflect. Isn't that creating a tension in the book? Because you are looking for more generalizing conclusions on the migrant strategies of creating, of negotiating home as a process for people with a migration background. And on the other hand, superdiversity invites us to look at the process of diversification within those groups. So perhaps first generation with a Moroccan background will negotiate in a complete other way as a second, third, to fourth generation, etc. Highly educated will negotiate in another way as people without any education, first generation foreign workers, for example. So how about that tension? My second remark is building up on that. In the introduction of the book you say, well, the book is mainly focused on, and I quote, low-skilled migrants from labor exporting countries, and to a lesser extent to forced migrants and asylum seekers. You say that in the introduction, and that's where the other part of the research, part of your empirical material comes from, and research you did on super diversity and social work. But isn't that a limit in the book? And are you not losing that focus in the rest of the book, where you are more generalizing and saying, well, what are strategies of migrants? And wouldn't it be important to look at those 2 groups? The low-educated, the vulnerable migrants versus, for example, expats. And how are they creating home? Visiting professors, etc. They take a sabbatical and go to another university, another city, etc. And how are they creating home? And wouldn't it be a strong difference between, and I just used Bourdieu in a very simplistic way, taste out of necessity, because people do not have the financial means, versus differences in social cultural capital, which might be influenced as well by ethnic or religious or migration experiences. So should we not elaborate that a little bit more? And just to give you a small anecdote from Brussels. The city of Brussels has 2 shops of IKEA. And I think we all know IKEA. One is in the northeast part of Brussels, near the airport of Zaventem. And the other one is in the south of Brussels, in Anderlecht, Urique. In both shops, Brussels is large enough to have 2 IKEAs, sell the same stuff we find everywhere in each of our cities of IKEA. And if you enter those 2 shops as a visitor, as a customer, you will not notice the differences. But there are important differences in 2 ways. The southern part of Brussels is a very poor area. And most of the customers there are coming from third countries, non-EU countries. And you see quite a number of headscarves, quite a number of Muslim customers, etc. People from all over the world living in the poor areas, in Anderlecht, Urique, in the south of Brussels, and the old area around it. When you enter the IKEA near Zaventem, you will find the expats, and the diplomats, and the people working for the European community. Not only because it's closer to where they live in the more wealthy parts of Brussels, but also because there is some, well, it's known, and they feel at home. And IKEA is adapting in a very discreet way what kind of furniture they're exposing and how many, some of the more expensive seats and tables are exposed in that shop, and where some things are more cheaper in smaller pieces and smaller rooms in the other. But both shops look like IKEA, and when I would not have told you that story, you would not have noticed it when you visit the 2 shops. But it's a little bit of what is homing, and it's not only about ethnicity and migration, but socioeconomic circumstances might matter more than you highlight now in your book. This brings me to the third and last comment I want to make. That is invite you to reflect on what I would call the paradox of the concept of superdiversity and superdiversity lens. And it refers to the debates we had yesterday between Godfried and Engbersen in our school as well. That are we able, should we look beyond the ethnic lens when we use phrases of superdiversity, when we go into realities of superdiversity? And the theory, the concept, not the theory, the concept of superdiversity invites us to look beyond the ethnic lens, to study differences and processes of differentiation, not mainly or not only through ethnic perspectives, but socio-cultural and language, religion, and all other kind of stuff. And the paradox for me in superdiversity theory is that in super diverse contexts where the diversity has become commonplace, where it's had process of normalization, ethnicity is only one marker of difference, such as age or gender or sexual orientation or socioeconomic things and class, etc., etc. So superdiversity invites us to look beyond the ethnic lens, focusing less on ethnic differences, and so focusing less on migration. But on the other hand, we're in a transition period. And in quite a number of sectors and domains in society, we still are not aware enough of the transition towards superdiversity. When I enter the aula with my architectural students, I have to explain them that there has been some migration during the last half century. And that the majority of the population has roots in migration, that not everyone is thinking like they are and living like they are, etc. So in such a context, I need to pay more attention to ethnic differences, cultural backgrounds, migration trajectories, in order to make them aware for that. In 10 years' time, I will explain them that they have to look beyond the ethnic lens, otherwise they will start culturalizing, they will start stereotyping. So first they have to become aware about increasing ethnicity, increasing superdiversity. Then they should be aware that they should not culturalize, not think stereotypical, they should look at differentiation processes within those groups, other axes of differentiation, etc. So isn't your book an example in struggling as well with that paradox of superdiversity? paying less attention to ethnic differences in the long term, but because the domain of homing still is not that intercultural as perhaps we would like it, pay more attention to migration backgrounds, migration trajectories, and the influence on processes of homing in the short term. But thanks for the book to my students for enjoying it.
Thank you, Paolo, for inviting me to reflect upon your book. My name is Godfried Engbersen. I'm a professor of the Erasmus University. I'm a sociologist by training. And let me start by complimenting you for an excellent and also a highly original book. And I learned already from the former speakers that you are an excellent geographer and an ethnologist, but I think you're also a wonderful sociologist. There is this famous phrase of C. Wright Mills about sociological imagination, and I think your book shows your imagination. We also make this distinction between private troubles and public issues, and what you shows in your book that searching for a home, as we all know, is indeed a private trouble, but if you show it's really a public issue. So let me first present a few arguments, which have been presented already by the former speakers, why it's an important one. And I think it provides us with a rather original lens to study rather classical topics like integration, identification, maintaining transnational relationships, return. And so by focusing on in search of a home, you are dealing in fact with all these rather classical questions, and also with the obstacles. We will come back to that later. Secondly, I think why it's important because there is an upcoming literature, especially in the Netherlands, and a research group around Professor Bivand, searching why residents in the Netherlands, migrants and non-migrants, do not feel at home anymore. Yes? And I think you have your this complements that by raising another question about in search for that home. And thirdly, as been said before, what is rather original is this concept of homing. It's already in the dictionary I learned. Dirk was extremely proud when self-fulfilling prophecy was a specific concept in the Oxford Dictionary. But it would be wonderful if there also is a relation to your work about more political and sociological meaning of homing. And Norbert Lyons has this wonderful article, Homo Clausus, and he makes this point: many concepts in sociology are static or stable concepts, and we need to introduce process concepts. Not home, but homing, not migrating, not exclusion, but excluding. Not power, but shifting power relations. So I think you, in that particular sense, you are a wonderful sociologist. Okay, how to bring your research further? And as has been said before, but that we repeat it. I think it's crucial to have a more comparative focus and to bring in other migrants. Dirk already gave the example of expats. Of course, they're extremely interesting because they bring, especially the idea of expat bubbles. Because they are copying or reproducing their home in other settings. It's wonderful also to look at, for example, the experts or the highly skilled. A very important group within Europe is now the intra-EU mobility, and especially the circular migration, or what I call liquid migration. For example, here in Rotterdam and also in The Hague, Polish hotels, short stay facilities, but also this private dwellings, which are already in the literature in the Chicago school, the Sorbonne, the Gold Coast and the Slum, the world of furnished rooms. What is this certain extremely mobile world, extremely mobile. So people living for a few weeks or a few months in a specific dwelling. However, they also try to create a home. And most extreme example maybe the irregular settlements near Calais, irregular migrants constricting out. So different groups who have, as you showed in your little figure, different opportunity structure, kind of different trajectories, they creating different types of homes, have different relationships with the home country. So I would like to stimulate you also to look at other categories than you already did. However, if you do kind of comparative research, of course, you have not only to zoom into the home, but to move away from the home, and to move to the state. And then you're dealing with citizenship regulations. Then you have more wanted and more unwanted migrants. And you have not only to look at migration policies or citizenship policies, but also welfare state policies. Having access to public provision provides you with more stability, with more security, with more safety, with more protection. And so it is crucial also to move away from the home and to look at literature on citizenship, welfare state, and as Marta said also, the whole political climate nowadays, not only at the national level, but more national tendencies, but also at the local level. In some towns in the Netherlands, there's a warm welcome, more friendly climate. There's the reception of migrants, really welcoming them, and for example in Rotterdam it's different. Finally, it would be wonderful to have indeed a kind of confrontation with the Jan Duivendag literature, the not feeling at home literature, and in search of home. And to learn about these two brands of literature. But I leave it to this. Thank you.
So, thanks very much for all these rich and stimulating comments. My idea actually was not so much to have a session on the book in itself, but to see how the topic can create resonances and convergences or anyway debates across our research interests. So I'd like to try and take no more than 5 minutes to very quickly address some of the many points that have been raised so far, and then give back the floor to anybody who wishes to feed with more comments, questions, remarks, because I think the opportunity for this session to work out has not to do only with the comments on a book, which are primarily a gift to the author of the book, but with the possibility to share some more concerns and research interest about these topics. So very simplistically, just one point discussing, because I am unable to do more than that. It would be too much for my skills and for my time. Now, the first set of comments from Marco. I do agree on the fact that home is not a matter of critical relevance in terms of access, of recognition, of belonging, and so forth, for migrants only, but also for descendants, second, third generations, and so forth. Here I see just 2 points. On one hand, that actually the argument could be stretched further, and that home, the search for home, or the recognition of what is home and not, and the contention, but it matters to all the population. The migrant condition makes it more visible, more urgent from the outside, primarily as a matter of access. But once home is appreciated both in terms of materialities and everyday life and as a public issue, it does affect the debate between majorities and minorities at many levels and axes, migrant background being only one of them. The key point for me here is to show that there is no reason for the notion of home to be reduced to the romantic ground of the sweet, good place. But it does also work in many ways, including problematic ways, as a tool for claims making in the public sphere, for recognition, for control of space, for defining the boundaries of who is entitled to be there legitimately, of who is entitled to feel at home or not. So it has a number of implications that deserve being appreciated besides the case of migrants only. Although, again, the migrant condition makes more striking the contradictions associated with home, I believe. So I do very much welcome the invitation to go besides this focus only. Now, as quickly and as simplistically perhaps on Marta's comments, too many things for me to follow up properly. Anyhow, two of them, among many others. One, the interface between home writ large and national membership. If I got a point where the argument was there is no reason for home as nationhood to be necessarily bad, exclusivist, or discriminatory, and so forth. To me, the interest point here is to denaturalize the whole argument, to make the point that there is nothing necessary or obvious in the fact that one national scale is tacitly framed as the home of someone rather than someone else. To me, the point is to show, to highlight how the emotional, warm response of home can be manipulated implicitly as a way of saying someone can be here legitimately, some others cannot. So I'm not so much concerned with the emotion of home as a national scale per se, but rather on the political ways of manipulating them in a way or another. Also, I do welcome, I think it's important for anybody who does research on migrants' countries of origin to investigate migrants' houses, remittance houses, whatever we wish to call them, besides the obvious side of the big building apparently out of place. Because there is much more to it that has also to do with the very real financial, social, economical implications with the development of new incomes and so forth. So again, thanks for raising up these issues and so many more. Maja's comments, again, lots of food for thought. I like to pick up a couple of points. First, it's of major importance to zoom into the home, not only, as you were pointing out, on the material objects in themselves, but also on their everyday ways of using them, of appropriating them, of attaching emotions, meanings to them. Here, as a sociologist, I can connect to a major tradition in micro-sociological works, such as Godfried and so forth. The challenge I see here is twofold. On the one hand, doing research in the homes, which is something I would like to do in my own project and in our own project, and so many more have been sent to do, raises practical, ethical issues that should not be neglected. I'm sure that if each of us were asked by an ethnography, can I do research in your home, the reactions will be mixed at the very least. So there are some problems here. And the second problem, which I do see at different levels, is the risk of over-aestheticizing, as it were, the studies of the home. I sense sometimes in the literature on the home spaces as appropriated by migrants through decorations, national symbols, and so forth, the risk of over-emphasizing the aesthetic side, the symbolic side, and possibly losing sight of the very material constraints of bad, of poor housing spaces, of not being resources enough or overcrowded that are also there. So I do see the merit of the micro-investigation in the home, but I do see also some risk of losing the picture out of the home itself. Alistair. Again, as usual, you have to repeat the same for 6 times, but I have no other way than saying thanks for this. Having some parallel with the Godfried is obviously a big honor, but your point, which I'd like to try to address to some extent, has to do with the instrumental value of home, which is or should be very obvious, but it's definitely clear to me that there is no reason to emphasize only the emotional warmth, the sense of inclusion, of control, of familiarity in a complex space, unless there is also some basic degree of protection and security in accessing it. So, of course, there is an instrumental basic value, which, if whenever we lose track of it, I may always run the risk of over-romanticizing again the more emotionally abstract sense of home, rather than finding its real basis, its constraints, its limits in practice. I'm sure you did raise lots of more points than this, but in a few minutes, and I would never dare approach Lumen in half a minute, so I'd like to stop there.
I think it was a mistake in 10 minutes as well.
Now, Dirk, for the 5th time, I have to say thanks again. Absolutely, the migrant is a gross reification of a number of different social, demographic, cultural variables, and so forth. So in this sense, the book is nothing more than an attempt to approach a much deeper and complex theme. I was trying to recover your social economic circumstances are obviously important there. I was trying to recover your last point on how ethnic difference needs to be recognized before moving beyond it. I wonder if some parallel can be made with the study of home as such. Maybe it's important first to appreciate the practical everyday relevance of home as something that is negotiated and is not so obvious before moving further to more nuanced ways of analyzing it. Last, on Godfried, again, many stimulating invitations to move much further beyond what has been written so far. The debate on zooming down or zooming up, to me, is what makes this field of study, what I try to call as home and migration, both important and complex and problematic in many ways. But even so, and following up with Maja in this case, I don't see necessarily a need to focus only on the private, on the domestic space, because whether we like it or not, the category, the emotional repertoire of home is very much used also in the public sphere. So it has some relevance which needs to be addressed in a way or another. Now, on Godfried, on the debate between not feeling at home and the search for home, what is interesting to me, again, is that studying home, for migrants in particular, is not a matter of homes with home. It's not a matter only of domesticity, but it is exactly a way of trying to see how it is that the diversification of society from a very local level creates different ways of feeling or not at home. And that while this feeling may be superficially emotional reaction to much deeper, more complex process, they do matter. They do have consequences which need to be appreciated in their own right. We may not agree or sympathize with people who do not feel at home as a result of migration or whatever else, but there's some true and some collective relevance in this way of cultivating emotions that does matter and has practical consequences in practice that do matter for research, for policy making, and so forth. Now, I am absolutely sure I have done no justice to any of your very rich comments, but since there are 12 to 13 minutes left, I'd like to change my role again and ask if anybody wishes to fill in with the focused comments, remarks, questions following up the conversation we have had so far. That would be a valuable way of carrying on the topic. So I just say on one side.
I've been wondering in my work at home what home offers that other concepts that we already have don't offer. And I'm pretty dedicated to the concept, and I think it's important, but as Marco can tell you, I haven't fully worked out clearly why that always is yet. And I think with what has helped me a bit is to look at it from homelessness and unbelonging to see how these terms are different. So sort of a visceral reaction to during homelessness. And then you also get these ideas of state intervention being necessary there, and that people deserve a home. And people living in shelters are considered homeless. So it's not just about having shelter, it's all these other things that go in with ownership and caretaking and stability. But I still look at home making outside of houses, which is something that you've all been talking about, and why I think that is important is working with young people who've been in sheltered housing and state-run kind of group homes, and how that's not a home or a place they want to go back to, or young people who have been in situations of domestic violence or abuse. So I keep thinking, okay, well, they're home in other places. Like, there are other places that fill this function of home, and it's on the streets or in schools or other places. But I'm wondering if maybe that is taking it too far, and that perhaps that's just places where these people, young people, belong, and that they are in fact homeless in a very fundamental way. So I guess that's just sort of my general question, and something I've been thinking about, and that I wanted to ask at the conference on homing as well. But I think maybe this is just a good group of people to be thinking about what it really offers and what's specific and unique about it.
I have a question because the concept of home and especially for migrant people. So, is there do you include in this the fact that there is the idea of maybe going back, going elsewhere, or staying there? Because maybe it's also in the mind that you have to give a chance to the place where you are for being your home. But if you're living with an ideal place, or a place you want to go back, or a place you want to go, then do you give a chance to the place you are living in to your home? I really spoke about it in the book at the moment.
Thanks for all the papers and for your book about like the apologize in the past, because I read the book, so perhaps you have dealt with this. But I've just been wondering, because I come to the home concept and in practice from a point of view country of emigration, and when migrants move out of that country, how do they think of home in that transnational sphere in which they may operate? Some of the work that I have done, particularly in the context of a country like Albania, for instance, where migrants have been involved both in the building, and I'm talking here about the functionality of building a home, both in the building of the home themselves in the country they come from, but also in the countries they migrate to. Keeping in mind that a number of those migrants work largely in the construction sector. And I wonder whether there is a connection there to be made in the sense of them contributing to building homes for others, building homes for themselves, and that sort of affective dimension or the purely sort of functionality of that, and what can we learn about that transnational sort of connection in both places, and some of the ways that migrants actually also adopt some of these practices. So in the context of Albanians, for instance, working abroad in Greece or in other places in Italy, some of the ways of building those homes in Greece has informed how they build their homes back in Albania and vice versa. And the second point I wanted to make was about the micro-investigation within the home, and then you pointed out that brings about some really sort of difficult challenges, which I agree with. But then on the other hand, there are other methods which we could go about to do that, by including perhaps some more innovative and arts-based methods. So for instance, giving cameras to participants to document the homes themselves and interpret them for us as researchers, thus co-producing that knowledge, but also giving them a sense of allowing a platform of empowerment for them to let us.
Our point on how we can stretch the notion, the sense of home in the public space, even for homeless people. I see two responses. On one hand, there is clearly an issue of basic needs of social protection, all the more so for vulnerable people, homeless, and so forth, that does need to be addressed, and that's it. But I would respectfully insist on the fact that even there, an optic home notion has some relevance and sense, because it says something on how it is that people feel or not, in some ways, to have some sort of belonging, protection, and control in the public space. And part of the problem of homelessness has not to do only with access to basic infrastructure, which is clearly needed, but also with how reconnection with the local environment and community can be recreated over time. So there is clearly an issue of basic needs to start with, but having said this, some attention, some work on the emotional and the relational side of the process of appropriation of space or not does matter, and to me it does matter also in the public space. Having said this, there is a risk of over-inflating any word. The more common sense the word, the higher the risk. But I would still stick to the potential of a home optic in the public sphere to some extent. The second point was, I'm trying to be a bit quicker, going back home. I got lost.
No, yeah.
Sorry.
My question is, did your research did you take into account the fact that for some migrants, they have the idea they want to go back to the country of origin, or not, or they want to go to another country, and some want to stay, and that's make a big difference in the interpretation of what is wrong.
It absolutely does. The trap to which migrants are exposed, and I'm not them are overexposed, in my view, has exactly to do with the projection of an affective side of home somewhere else, wherever that be, only to find out at some point, whenever they are back, that they are not necessarily so accepted or welcome or identified as people belonging there. So there is a very important thing here, and there is, I believe, the need for some caution, some skepticism on the transnational common sense idea that migrants have two homes here and there. Maybe it's, in general terms, it's more correct to say that migrants would like to have two homes, but they do often find out in practice that this is a very much time and emotional and energy consuming process, so that if they are in fact somehow to identify with one, and possibly with one they are living with the most part, it's already a relatively good and satisfying achievement for them. I'm getting to the last couple of questions. Thanks for your point. I do see a potential interest in studying the circulation of home, to which means exactly how, in the very practice of building the built environment, of inhabiting it, a number of influences from different countries are brought here and there. So at the level of material characters, both in the inside and the outside, there is a potential to work more on how home characters, among so many other topics, are circulated and modified over time, also as a result of migration, not only by that, but also by that. And on the last question, absolutely, the home is nothing ideal, but the very romanticization of home and its inherent claim for a space to be controlled, private, out of the public realm is what makes all sorts of balance more tricky, more complex, more subtle to be investigated there. My point is by no means that home in itself is a positive value always and ever, but that a claim, a need, if you wish to feel at home, has a potential of inclusion for those who cultivate it, and a potential for turning into a public political debate between different groups, majorities and minorities in the public sphere. That's it. If there are no more points, I take the last half minute. Time matters, not the counters. To say again just thanks. My idea was not necessarily to speak that much of the book in itself, but to try to see out how it can evoke and deconnect research interests of a number of people. The book itself has been anyway published by Palgrave. It's terribly expensive, I apologize for that. Of the records, if someone wishes to have a PDF in a private email, I will be happy to circulate it. And on all of these topics, with a number of colleagues, some of them will be here now, we are carrying out a 5-year ERC research project, and hope to have more opportunity to talk about this and to research into this. So, that's all.
Hi, Marco. Hey, I'm Martiniello. I'm going to present in the session about rap and spoken word. Tomorrow morning. Yeah, tomorrow morning. Yeah, I've been